So, in today's episode, we are chatting to Erika Bustos. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, perfect. So, Erika is a mind body coach who helps her clients experiencing chronic illness become the creator of wellness through their nervous system regulation and body wisdom. So, welcome to the show, Erika. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. Excited to speak with you.
Amazing. So, I want to start off with kind of defining and understanding the mind body connection a little bit more for our listeners. So, how would you describe the connection between our emotional well being and our physical health, particularly when it comes to things like chronic symptoms?
Physical pain is directly related to emotional pain, and emotional pain is directly related to physical pain. And I think a lot of people see that separation, right? So we're constantly looking for, some type of blood test, which is going to show why we have this chronic pain. But the fact is, most people that I'm working with that experience chronic pain, they're not getting any solutions to this pain despite doing XYZ treatment, right? Changing their diet, taking supplementation, detoxing, all of those things. Definitely the route that I took for the first 3 years of my own journey until I realized that there really is an emotional root to physical pain and they cannot be separated.
That's really interesting. And I think you mentioned the word separation a few times there. And I think that is fundamentally what maybe Western society, but also just how we kind of cope with different, whether it's trauma, stresses, chronic symptoms. We create this kind of separation between our mind and our body in order to kind of just get through each day. Is that what you found in your own personal journey?
Absolutely. I mean, again, I'll get into my journey, but I very much, when I started my healing journey, took the kind of traditional route to things, even though it was more on the holistic side. I was searching for solutions to my pain through the detoxing and supplementation and all of those things. And while they did help a little, I definitely started to realize there's something deeper going on. And so I started to recognize my own patterns with my body and realize I am the most symptomatic when there is something highly emotional going on in my life, meaning there's some type of unresolved conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so interesting. I feel like we could probably all resonate with that. Like when your stress levels increase, if you are someone who experiences autoimmune conditions or any other type of kind of something that we may not see as like stress related, but we always have those flare ups around those times. And in those moments, you can see that really strong correlation between the mind and the body and the emotions and sensations and the nervous system. And this expression of these chronic symptoms for like including your own early symptoms, but for other people who aren't always maybe don't have that connection between their mind and body, what are some of those early indicators that emotional or mental stress is starting to manifest as physical symptoms or discomfort or chronic pain for individuals?
Uh-huh. Well, I just want to say that I lived 28 years of my life completely disconnected from my body. Like most people, I ignored all these early signs, right? Illness, I talk about this a lot on my social media account, but illness is a process. So we tend to think like, oh, I just, got this diagnosis out of nowhere. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis at 28. And at first I was just like, what's going on here? Like, this is some type of punishment that my body is doing, right? Or my body is attacking me, right? And I realized that, this is a process that's been going on, at least for me, since probably the moment I came out of my mom's womb, just because I did have a very traumatic upbringing and I experienced a lot of adversity. So I look back and I was able to see signs early as like 5 years old. I would have headaches. My digestion was all messed up. I was either really constipated or, just had to go really quickly. I had a lot of congestion that I was experiencing. I started getting vitiligo very young. And so I didn't understand any of those things. You just assume like, this is my genetics. So for me, before I got diagnosed with my autoimmune disease, feeling unwell was my baseline. That was my norm. So I had no comparison. And I think, most people that reach out to me, they don't have a comparison, right? They just usually feel unwell for so long until it becomes this label and diagnosis that they bring.
Isn't that crazy? And I can resonate that with so, like, when I was going through major depressive episodes or high anxiety, that was the norm, right? So when you started to feel calm, it was like, this feels weird and this isn't normal, and you want to go back into the state in which you were. But when it comes to chronic pain or chronic symptoms or just dealing with something on a daily basis, our brains are so smart that they can start to go, well, this is actually what we should be feeling like on a day-to-day basis, even though logically we can kind of separate and say, well, actually, I don't feel that good, but we kind of just deal with it and grit our teeth and keep going. And so it's super interesting to, if you've started out in life in a certain baseline, knowing that there's something else that could be attainable for you would just be a strange kind of thought process to go through. And I bet getting the diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis might have been like shocking, but also a bit of a blessing in disguise for you as well. What was that experience like?
Yeah, well, that understanding that this was an awakening took me many years. So I don't expect anyone newly diagnosed with chronic illness to be like, this is an awakening, right? Because an awakening is associated with something positive, whereas illness is associated with something negative, right? So I want to go back to what you were saying about how our thinking brain is really good at disowning, avoiding, downplaying, distracting, suppressing, right? So that is the way that most people function, is very thinking brain top down oriented, right? Let me think my way out of this feeling. And so we're constantly in the solve, fix it mindset with things, right? And so that in itself can create more stress in the body because we're actually working against survival brain's interpretation of what's going on, right? So our thinking brain's like, we're good. I can get through this. I'm resilient. I could take on more hours. Those are all things that I did for a very long time. But my survival brain was like, we don't have the resources to help you get through this because we're so threat focused right now, right? And so eventually, after decades of living in this survival state, your mind body systems begin to wear down because you don't have that option for healing, growth, and restoration.
Yeah. And I think what you are explaining is so, so important and fundamental for people to understand is like our brain has the capacity to kind of try to override these survival mechanisms, but it's finite. Like eventually something does have to give. Like we can't operate in this fight or flight capacity because it's so metabolically challenging for our bodies, and it causes a lot of issues like autoimmune conditions. So I think you said something really interesting, like an awakening is something that's maybe tied to something positive. And I kind of have a shifted perspective to that. I feel like awakenings are nearly always painful, right? Because it's a realization. It's a realization that, hey, something I've been doing or the way in which I'm like living or something that I once knew to be true has now shifted. And that kind of realization is often really painful because it challenges our identity. It challenges how we see the world. It challenges who we thought we were and how we're kind of stepping into this new place. So there's like inevitably this space of like limbo that we find ourselves in where we're trying to figure out who the hell we are now, now that we have this new piece of information. And like, I think that's a really maybe unspoken part of this kind of idea of like healing and awakening and learning about yourself, is that it's actually can be quite a painful process, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I hope I didn't make this seem like it's this like, I don't know. It's at first you're going to feel uncomfortable, right? So when I got my diagnosis, it was like an outer body experience. Talk about threat to your nervous system. It's like, I have no control over this, right? So you have this doctor telling you this is a lifelong disease. For me, because I had these specific blood markers that it I had an aggressive form of this disease. It's progressive. In 10 years, you're going to be disabled. I mean, that is what I was told. So my 28-year-old self, who was in graduate school, actually trying to become a therapist, right? My whole life got shifted. So in no means was that diagnosis at first like this beautiful thing, but over time, as I could see that my body had been screaming to me for decades, right? That was the awakening of realizing like my body is communicating to me, but that took a long time for me to get to that place and to actually have respect for my body. So a lot of people that are diagnosed with a chronic illness, specifically autoimmune disease, we're taught to believe that our body is attacking us, right? It's this thing that we are completely powerless and helpless to, right? Which adds to more trauma for another person, right? Because it's literally feeling no sense of agency over that. But as you start to go on this process of becoming well, right? It's a reconnecting to self, reconnecting to the body. And with that is gaining that trust that a lot of us don't understand or haven't felt in our lives. So it took me a while, but I definitely believe, I'm able to help people with chronic illness in a way that a lot of healthcare professionals are not able to, because I have my own wisdom that I've gained through experience. A lot of what I talk about with my clients, although it's fundamentally rooted in the polyvagal theory and there's science there's a lot of personal wisdom that I'm able to offer my clients that is relatable to them in a way that they're most likely not getting from other
Yeah.
healthcare professionals.
Yeah, and that's pretty powerful, isn't it? When you can attune to your clients and they
Mm-hmm.
actually feel like they're seen for the first time because you go, yeah, I've been there and I felt exactly the same way as you or a similar way to you. And that is probably fundamentally one of the most powerful things that you can have in therapeutic care, that our medical system is not built around that kind of approach in any way, shape, or form. They're like, here is the information and here is some medications potentially to help you along your way. But my absolute number one pet peeve is how many individuals end up in doctors' offices that get told that something is going to be with them for the rest of their lives and that they don't have, there's no course of action for them to take to either completely overcome it or manage it in a way that's going to be best for them. And that to me is my number one gripe with the medical system, because how disempowering, right? How disempowering to be told that there is absolutely nothing you can do about this at 28 years old and that you're going to be disabled. So I really feel for you, and going through that experience, and for anyone listening, going through that experience is truly, truly traumatic to hear those words. And I stress that it is not the only way forward. And there are people like Erika out there and myself who are supporting individuals who have been put in that position, because that is the last position that you want to be put into. And there is always something that you can do. But I would love for you to kind of explain how specifically the fight or flight response can impact our bodily functioning, and how does that actually contribute to these persistent symptoms or chronic symptoms?
Well, there's the fight or flight, shutdown, freeze, fawn. There's these three different states of our nervous system with different blends of that. But what I can say in the most simplest way is that when our body moves out of regulation, which is homeostasis, our body is moving into dysregulation, meaning that it is mobilizing or immobilizing us to meet the demand of some type of challenge or threat. So it's not synonymous to be in fight or flight and then healing. So the thing is, when I think about the first few years of my journey as my system was coming out of this chronic state of dysregulation, I was approaching my healing from this state of fight or flight, right? So very hypervigilant to my body, very self-critical, obsessing over everything, ruminating over every little choice that I've made in my life, but I'm from this very perfectionistic way of being, right? And that to me, I understand perfectionism more as a survival part, not a personality trait. So the thing is, a lot of people approach their healing from this state of fight or flight, and they're not realizing that it's actually doing the opposite, right? So we think if I control everything, if I eliminate gluten and dairy and every possible thing, then my body is going to heal. But when we are in that state of dysregulation, again, healing, growth, and restoration is being put on hold for our survival. So it is normal, healthy, and adaptive to go into these defense states, but it's when we're spending days, weeks, months, decades, perhaps most of our lives, like myself. So
Mm.
I was a person that was either in that fight or flight or that complete shutdown. So I was either very anxious or very depressed. There was no in between that. And so I didn't even know what safety meant, nor did I know what that felt like. And I think that's the other thing. A lot of us are living in these defense states, but we're so used to it, right? It's become our baseline that
Mm.
we don't know that there's anything wrong, right? So that was me chronically living in these two states as my baseline and not ever knowing what does safety physiologically feel like.
Yeah. And so you said two things there that I think are really important. So first is homeostasis. How would you explain that to someone listening?
So this is our body in balance, right? So when we think about dysregulation, it's all of our mind body systems, our immune system, our digestive system, our endocrine system, our cardiovascular system. All of these things are getting knocked out of our window to be able to manage that, to meet the demand of that threat or challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then homeostasis is the opposite of that, where everything's kind of like, I like to kind of explain it as like business as usual. It should be
Yes.
the go-to state in which things are functioning the way that they should be, like optimally. And so it's
Yes.
really interesting. Obviously, like if you encounter like a stressor in your day-to-day life, so let's say you tripped over and you grazed your knee, your body is going to push you out of that state of homeostasis because you need your immune system to respond to that
Yes.
and kind of increase like the white blood cells to that area to create like clotting. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to go too deep into that,
Yeah.
but we need that response to occur. But then we need to come back down into that state of homeostasis, right?
Yes. So
Yeah.
I think about as human beings, right? Our state of homeostasis is our state of connection, right? So we can ask ourselves, how often am I spending time in this state of connection versus state of protection? So I really just think about it in that terms. And so when we're in our state of dysregulation, this is not a state of connection, right? Our social engagement goes down. Our ability to be curious about things, our ability to be resourceful, all of those things. So I really think, it's, again, to anybody listening, these protective states are adaptive, right? But they become maladaptive when we experience chronic stress and trauma, where we don't have the ability to recover and come back to that baseline state of safety.
Yeah. And you've mentioned safety a few times now. So I'm interested what it's really difficult to explain the
Yeah.
sense of safety to individuals. And like you said, I feel like a lot of people, most people feel chronically unsafe. And there's that feeling of like, I've got to, like, you're either in fight or flight, like, I've got to keep moving, I've got to keep doing to keep myself safe, or you're in that depressed dorsal vagal state of freeze shut down where you're like, I can't motivate myself to get up and do things. But what was that first experience of feeling like physiological safety for you? What was that process like? And how did you kind of explore your sense of safety? And how did you know that you were experiencing something that was safety?
Well, yes, this is, again, safety is one of those things where, I really take my time with my clients to help them understand that on a very individual basis, right? Because safety is not just calm, right? So I think social media, there's a lot of regulation equals calm. We always want to be calm. And, safety can feel like a lot of different things. So what I help my clients check in on to see if they are in their state of safety is, one, how much am I able to tolerate what's going on inside my body right now? Okay. The second thing is, can I have attentional control? So can I keep my awareness perhaps on a part of my body or maybe something in my environment without getting sucked into the thinking brain, right? Strategy to overanalyze and to criticize, or maybe to that survival brain hijack where
Mm.
their emotions and their sensations and their symptoms are overwhelming them. So just clarifying, safety is calm is not the goal of safety, right? It's a sensation of feeling safe when we're feeling calm. So there's a lot of different ways that we can understand safety, but I think again, social media has given it one label of like we equal safety. I'm like, oh, we don't always want to be calm. We want to be playful. We want to be curious. We want to, be able to move our bodies and laugh. Like it's so many different things.
Yeah, and so many blended states that go into all of those movements. So like playful intimacy, like you have like a
Yes.
sprinkling of sympathetic activation in there. And it's so much more complex than just trying to achieve this very monotone way of living, of being in a calm state. And that's why I think when we look at regulation and it's become such a buzzword, it's like, well, what's the resilience of your nervous system to what is occurring in your environment and
Yes.
internally? And I think you explained safety in such a beautiful way that shows all of the very important components that make up our sense of safety. So when you were exploring that kind of experience for yourself, what were some of the things that you started off to do to try to explore your sense of safety?
So I started my healing journey in 2016. So this was pre-nervous system regulation, somatic experiencing, like those things were not in my awareness. So just starting my journey, just learning like the fundamentals of mindfulness and like learning to explore my body with more curiosity and, that non-judgmental curiosity kind of set the foundation for that. So when I learned about the polyvagal theory, read your book, The Vagus Nerve Reset, and the holistic psychologist, Dr. Nicole Perez, How to Do the Work, and I was introduced to the concept of nervous system regulation, that blew my mind because again, I came into this work as a coach because I wanted to instill a sense of empowerment into my clients. Okay. But before I learned about nervous system regulation, I was just kind of approaching it from a more holistic point of view with elements of mindfulness in it. So when I started working with clients before I shifted into mind, body, nervous system work, I saw this pattern in every single one of my clients that they were all dealing with symptoms of dysregulation, but at the time, I didn't know, right? They were all identifying as people pleasers or perfectionists or overworkers, overachievers. So I was like, this is really interesting. And so because I have, my undergrad was in psychology, I was at graduate school when I was diagnosed with my autoimmune disease. I ended up leaving after my first year just because I was like, something's not resonating with this approach to mental health. So that's a little backdrop on that. And so when I learned about this information, then I was able to put into perspective the healing that I had done up into that work and realize that I'm feeling more safe in my body, which is allowing my body to actually heal. So a lot of these concepts were putting into perspective everything that I had done
Yeah.
in all those years up until learning that information. And so once I learned that, I was like, I'm reading every single book possible because I'm a very curious person. So and again, with my interest in human behavior, biology, like all of these things kind of came together and it put everything into perspective. And once I learned that, I was like, this is absolutely what I want to teach my clients because regardless if you're dealing with chronic illness, okay, every human being needs to understand their nervous system because when you understand how your nervous system works, you understand these different states of your nervous system, how that feels physiologically, you're not fearful anymore,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you understand anxiety, you understand depression, you understand digestive issues, you understand chronic pain in a way that really is very liberating. And so basically, I was able to think back of like, wow, I spent my life in survival feeling this way, and now I can feel this way. I am able to be socially engaged, right? Because that is what that state of safety was. And I didn't live that way. I lived very much narrow tunnel vision with everything, not really connected to anybody around me and not certainly connected to myself. So again, it was kind of that like retrospect that helped me understand what it is that I had been doing on my journey.
Yeah, I love that you kind of touched on how those states of anxiety or depression or stress, they're not scary anymore when, like, you basically remove the stigma of
Yeah.
all of these different states because you make more sense in the world and how you're navigating the world through understanding your nervous system and being able to map everything. You then go, well, it makes sense that I'm feeling like this, or it makes sense that I'm
Mm-hmm.
having this physical reaction or physical symptom. It makes sense that my autoimmune condition has flared up because XYZ is happening
Mm-hmm.
physiologically. And I think that is the power of reconnecting with your body and understanding yourself on that deeper level. And so I'm like forever grateful for people like you in my sphere who are educating and supporting individuals to find that space of reconnected practices and
Mm-hmm.
understanding themselves. And I think it's also really interesting that you kind of touched on that. You kind of started intuitively
Yeah.
exploring your sense of safety. And I think can you expand on that a little bit, just
Mm.
the intuitive side of things? Because I think fundamentally we do know how to
Yeah.
create a sense of safety, but our thinking brain can get in the way of that. And we go,
Mm-hmm.
no, that's silly, or that's too simple, or that's XYZ, whatever it is. But
Mm-hmm.
can you touch a little bit on how you kind of just connected with that space of just exploring and intuitively finding what felt
Mm.
safe for you?
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly right. I lived very, logical, right? Before my diagnosis, it was like, get the degrees, get the grades, right? It was all very thinking brain oriented again. So the the diagnosis helped me slowly connect back to my intuition, right? So that intuition really is only fully accessible the more safe you feel in your nervous system, right? It truly is because it's that thinking brain and survival brain working together as allies, which is what gives you that ability to fully be intuitive. So that process of connecting to my intuition slowly started to build as I, again, felt more safe in my body. But those decisions that I made, I think about some of the first decisions that I made when I started my journey, which was like reevaluating friendships, right? I just got diagnosed with a chronic illness. Who is going to be there to support me in this time that, was very critical to my well being? And so evaluating friendships was kind of like the thing that I did to, nourish that sense of safety, making decisions based off of how my body felt versus
Mhm.
what I thought I should be doing. So it was these little things that I did over time that I started to feel like there is an inner wisdom in me that knows what I need, but I cannot get caught up in the thinking brain story about it.
Hmm.
And so again, those are kind of concepts that I intuitively was doing and teaching my clients, but I didn't have the words of nervous system regulation to kind of put to it.
Yeah, and I think that probably helps you in a certain way because sometimes when we have labels for certain things, then it kind of stifles our creativity or
Mhm.
ability to kind of just explore. And I love like picturing you. And I always talk about the concept of like being a mad scientist in your life and just being
Mhm.
totally
Oh,
curious
totally.
about yourself, about your environment, about the things that you're
Mhm.
doing. But I think you brought up something really important there about being very stuck in your head. And this was kind of the catalyst for my journey as well. Was I was totally like disconnected mind and body,
Mhm.
and everything was a nut that I had to crack. I had to think my way through
Yeah.
everything, and I'm a pretty logical and rational person. But after like decade of banging my head against the wall, being like, well, I haven't figured out how to think my way out of this,
Yep.
my kind of counter to that was well, I need to just start doing stuff. Like, I actually need to utilize my body to do certain actions as opposed to
Mhm,
trying to think about things. And that for me was kind of like exploring like movement and
mhm,
sport and just starting to do things instead of thinking
mhm.
about it. Because my thinking brain was like, no, don't go into that gym. Everyone's staring at
Yeah.
you. Don't do this. Don't do that. And I was like, no, I'm in the state of doing now. And I'm
Mhm,
going to start exploring through my actions instead of through my thoughts. So I think that's a
mhm,
like such a fundamental shift is going from like being stuck in your brain of like, should I do this? What happens if this
mhm.
happens into a state of action? And that is the state in which like your nervous system really starts to respond because it can actually give you really strong messages like this is good or this is bad or this is
Yep.
neutral. And then you can really start to build that connection between the mind and the body when you start to go, I notice that message of good or bad or neutral and I can start to
Mhm,
explore those things a lot more as well. So I love that you kind of bring together all of these different parts. Like the cognitive aspect is so important because obviously
mhm,
like when we have these ingrained patterns and beliefs and thoughts, that's going to impact our nervous system as well. Is that in
mhm,
your experience, like once your body started to kind of shift back into a state of connection, did you
mhm.
notice that there was maybe like an aftermath of lingering like beliefs, patterns of thought that were maybe not caught up to that sense of safety that you kind of had to work on afterwards?
Mhm, mm. Yeah, when you're talking about the doing, I'll get back to that. But when I first started on my journey, Dr. Joe Dispenza was kind of the first person that I found that had this kind of alternative perspective to chronic illness. And so he talked a lot about, a lot of people are stuck in the thinking and they don't get to the doing and to the being. And so before I even started this nervous system work with my clients, that was something that I very much often repeated was we want to get from the thinking to the doing to the being, in which now I see it as the embodiment of what you understand, right? So that's a whole different layer to healing that people, they get stuck with because, again, this thinking brain dominance, which is really coming from that dysregulation. So if we can get up to a place where we kind of, again, you have the awareness like, okay, these are thinking brain story and agenda, but does that match what I feel like I need, right? And then just taking that action regardless of what that kind of thinking brain story is about. Because your body really is going to move you toward or away from something that it really needs. It really does work that way, but you kind of you have to lean into that and actually do it because it doesn't equal any change to your body if you just stay in the thinking. So it did take me a while to get from the thinking to the doing to the actual being of it. So now it's not a conscious effort for me to be like, how do I feel safe? How do I need to feel safe in this moment? Right. It's just kind of, again, intuitively and instinctually that I'm able to have this kind of communication.
Yeah. And so just going back to I love all
There was
of
the
that
other
and I
question.
resonate.
I was
Yeah,
like, you
it
asked me something.
resonates.
I was like,
No, because it ties into all of that. And I think this is where a lot of people maybe get stuck is that they're doing all of the like body work, kind of
mhm,
reconnective practices, somatics, all of those things, but their thought patterns may still be stuck in the,
yeah.
well, this isn't, yeah. So have you noticed that? As I've noticed it a lot in my clients, but I'm curious to know if you have also noticed in your own journey
Mm,
experiences within your clients, if there's like a bit
mm,
of a lag that occurs between our thought patterns and our cognitive processes
mhm,
and our like physiological sense of safety and working with our nervous
mhm,
system.
mhm. I mean, definitely, I think I approached it in a different way. Whereas, again, I learned about Dr. Joe Dispenza. So I kind of focused, again, even though it was more thinking brain based at first, it did help me rewire these kind of subconscious beliefs that I had about myself, which then allowed me to do more of the action because I was actually starting to believe and the way that I was changing my thoughts around illness. But I would say that I have when someone signs up for a consultation with me, one of the answers that I have on there is what would be your greatest barrier or limiting belief when it comes to mind body healing or nervous system regulation? And every single one of them says that I can't get better. Okay. So since I shifted into this work and I've had all these consultations, I find it very interesting that there is a very clear link between the person's beliefs about themselves and this healing process and how well they're able to do on this journey. So the people that really truly believe they cannot get better, there is a lot more resistance to this work. So when it comes to all this, right, like when we think about nervous system regulation, I know there's a lot of somatic emphasis, right? But we cannot discredit our belief system, right? So this is why you really have to take a top-down and bottom-up approach, because you can just work on things somatically without changing a little bit about your belief system, right? But the same side is like on the opposite side is you can't just change the way you think about things, but then not do the doing to change how you feel. So it really, when I think about my own journey, there really was a combination of both things going on, right? So I left graduate school. I started prioritizing my wellness for the first time in my life, prioritizing stillness, prioritizing movement, prioritizing sleep, these very basic biological needs, which is often how I start working with my clients. If you've been living disconnected from your body for so long, you're not going to get your client to go automatically into attending to their emotional needs. So for me, it's really helping my clients, the basics, co-regulation. One, starting with the work that I do with them, that is a lot of, for my clients, their main source of co-regulation, right? Then it's sleep, movement, getting outside, nutrition. These basic things, they do have to be met. And I believe that's actually what supported my system getting out of that chronic state of survival, was first attuning to those basic biological needs before I was able to dive into the emotional needs part of that.
Yeah. And that's, I think,
I
what
hope
a
I
lot of
answered
people.
that.
No, absolutely. You did it beautifully. And I think a lot of people want because what we're feeling and experiencing and have gone through feels so big and complex and difficult, attending to those really basic needs like sleep or hydration or nutrition or getting natural light or all of those things feel overly basic, and we want to overlook them, right? So I totally resonate with you. I always work with my clients first, especially on sleep, because seems to be obviously like supporting your brain and your body to actually be able to go through all of the processes that it needs to start each day like is so important. And there's literally not one physiological process that sleep does not impact. So if you can start to work on your sleep, then you are going to give yourself such a beautiful start to whatever it is that you are undertaking, whether it is somatic work or cognitive work or whatever it is. You're going to be in a better position physiologically to undertake that. I think what you said also about kind of shifting into like utilizing both top down and bottom up approaches is so important. For me, what I found to be most useful, because as we kind of chatted about earlier, a lot of people don't actually know what it feels like not to be in that state of like dysregulation, let's say. And so for me, a lot of the time is like, how can we just create like one small shift where you feel different, even if it's just for a moment? So you use your body in a way that creates a different sensation, maybe you touch that sense of safety or touch that feeling of regulation for a moment as a catalyst to then shift your thoughts, right? So as in, the more that you can start to show, hey, there is actually a different way of thinking and feeling, the more your brain is going to go shift from a state of very rigid, maybe a negative belief pattern, to one of like curiosity, right? Hey, what does this feel like? Hey, maybe there's something else in there for me to feel. So I find that working like primarily first with the body to create a shift, and then working on the cognitive processes is such a powerful way to allow that synergy to occur in its natural sequencing of events, right? So working with the body and then integrating the mind creates such a strong connection because we actually give ourselves the capacity to see that there's a different perspective, to see that there is
Mm-hmm.
a different opportunity to feel different. So I love that you touched on the thinking and the doing and creating that kind of symbiotic relationship that we all have innately within us to create a space
Mm-hmm.
for healing and for nurturing our body, and using the basic physiological processes as the foundation for that is like
Mm-hmm.
just so fundamental to it. So to round things off, because you have shared so much information, I want you to just think back to your 28-year-old self, and you've just been newly diagnosed. For someone who is in a similar position, maybe they're feeling stuck or hopeless about their chronic condition or diagnosis, what kind of first steps or words of encouragement would you offer for them to reclaim a sense of control over their lives?
Well, I think if I was to look back, at how I approached just my healing journey, I tried to do this all alone. Okay. It was, again, operating from this kind of hyper independent, you know, being, right? It's like I can do this all on my own. I would say that anybody experiencing, whether it's, unresolved trauma or chronic illness, and to me, they're kind of synonymous, they end up eventually, right, living in that chronic state of dysregulation, is that we need other safe and trusted individuals as part of our healing journey. We cannot do this alone. So every person that comes to me for coaching, I'm actually their kind of last resort. You know why? Because they've done all these online programs and they have been sitting behind a computer and, skipping through modules and doing brain retraining things and all of these things. And yet they don't feel any difference to their nervous system. So I have a variety of people come in from a deep state of freeze to, extreme fight or flight. Like they're coming in, right, with a different level of dysregulation in their system. But I get to watch them slowly come out of that. And it's, they often tell me, Erica, yes, there's tools that I share with my clients, but it's the safe environment that you've created for me that allows me to feel like I know what is best for me. So I would say the biggest thing is, if you can afford to work with somebody, that's great. If you can't afford that, we have to look for ways to slowly stretch our system towards connection and out of that protection. So that can just be like going to a coffee shop and just observing people, going to a yoga class or something like that, just being around. Any way that we can slowly stretch our system towards safe interaction, to me, is the most critical part of healing our nervous system and our mind and body. And I am so grateful that I had a loving partner who became my husband, who was with me before I got my diagnosis and got to experience dysregulated Erica, who was constantly dealing with chronic symptoms, to regulated Erica, right? But this is very much missing for a lot of people. They're relying solely on the self-regulation. They're like, what is the one somatic practice that is going to cure all this? It's much more complex, but simple at the same time. If you have that safe support, there's so much healing that can be done just with that. So if I would have had what I provide to my clients back then, I think that could have excelled things, but I don't, it is what it is, right? But I'm just grateful that I get to be that support for another human being and see their true authentic self come out, the safer that their nervous system feels.
Yeah, and how lucky your clients are to be able to have you to attune to and co-regulate with. And I always find this really, really um, a difficult aspect of safety is how deeply intertwined our need for connection is with, because we are so separated from one another's now, because the digital age is well and truly here and we connect with people online. And that's a beautiful way to co-regulate as well through these spaces too. But I think it's we're very independent, we're very individualized. And I think the most powerful thing that I learned was that our way of evolving is through interdependence. We need one another. Our nervous systems are literally have a space in which they will connect with and borrow from other people's nervous system to calm themselves down. Like, we actually need one another. And that exploration into finding who or what feels most safe is a really valuable path to explore for yourself. Like, if you are doing it alone, like Erika said, like going and exploring, like sitting in a coffee shop and just seeing, oh, well, I like the way that that person's like facial expression made me feel. Like, just getting curious about these things in a safe environment for yourself is a beautiful way to start. So you have shared such beautiful wisdom and nuggets of gold in this interview, Erika. So thank you so much. And I will pop all of the details about how you can connect with Erika, how you can contact her, how you can do work with Erika as well in the show notes below. But is there anything that you wanted to share specifically with our listeners before we round things off?
I just want to say again, we are wired for connection. And I want you to think about how we think about food and water as a biological need. Co-regulation is a biological need. So we cannot, again, sustain doing this on our own. And if you have felt called to work with someone like you or me, I would take that first step of following that intuition, because I often have a lot of clients say, my protection parts were keeping me from reaching out to you for so long. But I'm glad that I followed that intuition that I was, still faintly connected to, because now I get to, experience life in a totally different way. This is not just about health when we're talking about nervous system regulation, even though a lot of my clients experience chronic illness. It's emotionally, it's socially, it's relationally. So there's all these components that our nervous system is affecting. So if you've just been skeptical, I highly encourage you to reach out to someone that you feel connected to, because that truly is going to be the first step to gaining that regulation and mind-body healing.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you to everyone for listening in, and thank you to Erika for your time today. I appreciate you so much. And I hope that you have all enjoyed this episode.